Sutra 9 reads, Swapno vikalpaha. Dream means mental constructs. So this sutra is meant to be interpreted two ways. First of all, it's saying that literal dreams that we have while we're asleep are primarily made of what's called vikalpas, mental constructs. The representations our mind makes of the world. In the dream state, that's all we're experiencing is mental representations. There is nothing else. But the sutra also means, and this is its much deeper message, that mental constructs are like dreams. The mental constructs that we have while we're awake are like dreams. So what does that mean? Well, first let's define mental constructs. Vikalpas, they are our stories about ourselves and others in reality. They are our narratives. They are our mental frames. They are the spin we put on things, our interpretations, right? All of these. So vikalpas are the ways in which we represent reality to ourselves, okay? So, we could just call them our stories, but they're a little bit, they hide out in various ways. So some things that we don't think are stories are also vikalpas, mental constructs, right? So when you form a picture of things, that is a mental construct. Now, let's say you form that picture of things based on what you think is an objective source. Let's say you watch the news, and then you form a picture of what's going on in the Middle East or the Ukraine or somewhere else, right? Nonetheless, this is purely a mental construct, presuming you haven't been there yourself recently. Then, even if you're drawing on very good news sources, it's still a mental construct. And indeed, what the news writers and newscasters are saying is also mental construct, right? Meaning to say, those news sources are paying attention to certain features of experience and not others. And then they craft a story out of it. And of course, in journalism, it is literally called a story, even if it's based on first-person experience. So my point is that there's far too many details to anyone's direct experience to report all of them. So they decide certain things are important and not others, and that colors the story that's presented. So people talk about biased news sources. Of course they're all biased. They can't help but be biased. There's no way to not be biased. The question is, in what way are they biased? Because when you bring a particular perspective into a situation, it causes you to notice certain things and not other things. Okay, so my point then is, the picture that you form based on the news of whatever part of the world or whatever situation is not reality. It is your mental construct. Now, it might bear some relationship to reality. If you're very good at forming effective mental constructs, it might allow you to interact with those who've been in those places effectively and understand their experience. But it's still a mental construct, and most people aren't very good at forming them. And rather, they create a story, they create an image in their head of what they think is going on, and then they act as if the image is the truth. They think they know what's going on there in the Ukraine or wherever, right? They think, well, my picture's pretty accurate, I think. I do listen to good news sources, No, but in fact, there are millions of people having the full range of possible experiences there, right? And your mental image is highly reductive compared to the full range of human experiences happening there. And that's even a relatively simple situation as compared to something like the complexities of a government or of a cultural issue, like something like racism or whatever. So we rapidly discover when we look into it that these mental constructs are highly problematic, to say the least. They become less problematic when we could acknowledge that they are mental constructs. Okay, so remember the sutra said that these mental constructs are like dreams. And what that means is that when we're living inside of our stories and our narratives, when we're taking them to be true or close enough to true, then we're dreaming without knowing that we're dreaming. So if you acknowledge that your mental constructs are mental constructs, they acknowledge that your stories are stories, then that's like waking up in the dream. That's like having a lucid dream. You're still dreaming, but at least you know it's a dream, right? So that does make a very, very big difference. So what's the point? What's the benefit of acknowledging this? Well, first of all, when you see that your stories are stories, you're less likely to weaponize them. You're less likely to bludgeon others over the head with your stories and try to get them to agree with your truth. And so that makes the world a better place right there, right? But also you become less emotionally triggered around them, around who agrees with you and who doesn't, and who acknowledges your arguments and who doesn't, and so on, you know. And you suffer less. You simply suffer less. But even more than all of that, and those are already very good reasons to wake up to the nature of mental constructs, it's also the case that when we do so, we can utilize our stories in more effective ways. That is to say, we recognize then that thoughts are tools, not truths, and we can use those tools more effectively. Whereas when you think that what you think is simply truth, you're not going to use it as effectively. You're not going to leverage those ideas in a way that's helpful to people, you know. Whereas when you recognize that your story is just a story, you can see it might be a helpful story to someone and not to someone else. So that's again like waking up in the dream. And it's a preferable mode of existence for sure. So may each one of us come to realize that the world is not our story about it, that life is not your story about it, that you are not your story about yourself, and that no one else is your story about them. Again, the story might have some value. It might be possible to leverage that story for benefit of some kind, but still, nobody is your story about them, and that includes you. And maybe you can feel right now the sense of freedom, the sense of liberation that comes when you simply acknowledge to yourself, I am not my story about myself. And when you really know that that's true, as opposed to just having the thought, when you know that you're not the story about yourself, then you feel all of a sudden that you are some sort of divine mystery. Because if you're not your story about yourself, then what are you? The mind goes blank. And you have to say, if you're honest, I don't really know what I am. That's a divine mystery. There's wonder possible there. As the philosopher Buckminster Fuller once said, I don't know what I am, but I seem to be a verb rather than a noun, a process. These are very, very wise words. When you think that you can be described with nouns, I guarantee you are in storyland. You're in the mind world. You're dreaming without knowing you're dreaming. In fact, none of us can be correctly described with nouns. We're all verbs. We're all processes. So may that realization be liberating for you. This sutra, once again, requires us to look back at Sutra 7 and interpret it in this light. Here we see then that turiya, that state of self-awareness, right, awareness of your true nature, the ground of your being, can exist at the same time as these stories. So, of course, only when you acknowledge that they are stories. So when you do so, you can see your stories for what they are, use them as tools when possible, let them lay by the wayside when not possible, and they don't need to inhibit your natural state of awareness presence. So that's the teaching of this sutra, Swapno Vikalpaha. Dream is mental constructs. Om.